In the ideal, there are no imperfections, but it's the imperfections in you that make space for me. And my imperfections are little places that you can hold on to. So
Yes.
I wouldn't want to do away with those imperfections. Being a happy person changes the things that come to you for sure. So if you visualize, and while you're visualizing, you're having this enjoyment of this outcome that doesn't exist, in subtle ways, that's changing who you are. We're doing the show, and I'm completely naked, pretending to, be
Yes.
intimate with Amy. And at one point, I'm standing there, you know what I mean? And I think, you know what? Nobody's listening to a thing I'm saying. They're looking at me. Like, they don't hear a thing I'm saying. I'm the most free person in this room.
Hello and welcome to Ego is Here. Today I'm joined by actor, model, and coach Dan Cordle. Hello, Dan.
Hey, how are you?
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
It's such a pleasure to have you. Dan, my first question is, what was it about acting that first captured you, not as a career, but as a way of expressing yourself?
The first thing that attracted me to it was that I realized there's the potential for a very deep kind of connection and conversation with other people. I don't just mean with the other actors,
Audience.
but
Uh-uh.
with the audience, which I think happens for a peculiar reason. Uh, when I'm talking specifically at the beginning when I was acting only in the theater,
Mm-hmm.
I found that the things that you could get into and discuss, by nature of the stories that you're involved in, involved very deep communication. Uh,
Uh-huh.
and even though you were acting, you were communicating with the other actor. And even though there's this, the guise of the character, and even though there's the distance between you and the audience, there's
There's still a connection.
yeah, there's a line in there
Mm-hmm.
uh, where you, regardless of whether you're communicating what you wanted to or not, you're having a very deep kind of like link. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
when I noticed that was true, I thought, wow, I'm not getting to do this as deeply in my personal life, being a
Mm-hmm.
teenager as I am, you know, and with all different kinds of people, because when you're a teenager, you're, you're kind of stuck with your
Yes.
other teenagers,
Yes.
you know what I mean? But,
Yeah.
you could talk to adults and little ones too. So it was great.
And I think, and for me as an actress, there is this exchange of emotions with the
Hmm.
audience, especially
Yeah.
in the theater. I mean, you can feel that exchange. Um, so yeah, I think it's a wonderful feeling. Do you remember your first time on stage? Like
Yes.
what was going on in your mind in that moment? Was
Yeah.
it
I mean,
terrifying?
it was a play. It was a school play. Um, uh, my mother made the costume, and I was playing a character that goes on an adventure, and has all these magical experiences. And it was such a joy. We did it. The performance didn't happen in the theater, but it was like a real play. They happened to use the classroom that I went to school in, uh,
Uh,
except they put seats. You know what I mean? And it was attended, of course, by parents and their children. Um, but I just loved, you know what I mean, that we were doing it. And I also, the other thing that really drew me to the theater was later, after that play, we moved to Europe, and when I was in school in Europe, we moved halfway through the year, so I didn't know anybody.
Mhm.
But I went to the play that they were doing, and they actually had a set, you know what I mean? And I was fascinated by the set, and I assumed, you know what I mean, that the set was three-dimensional, you know, that if you moved behind the set, there would be rooms and a whole house, you know what I mean, and with furniture. And so I snuck backstage after to see the house, you know, and it was like flats, and I thought, "Oh my goodness, it's, you know, this is so strange."
So that was the first time that you fell in love with acting? Like, with that with
I
the
think
idea of acting?
I think it was a slow progression, but I think what happened also, I grew up moving internationally,
Mhm.
and,
Yes,
you know, when you move every couple of years, every 3 years, over a long span of time as a child, you don't always get the chance to be with people long term. You know, you don't get the chance to be with them long term or to develop the kinds of
like
relationship.
yeah,
So for us that were international, it was always very fast. You know, you either had to make friends quickly, deep friendships, and then, you know, of course, you had to leave them, or else you didn't make friends at all.
of
Uh,
course.
and either way, the theater was very useful because in theater, you know, you make deep friends within a month. You know,
Yeah,
so
yeah, of course, of course.
it was important to me for that too.
And how has stepping into different, characters helped you come closer to your own identity?
Very much so. I wouldn't say that as a theater actor, I was aware that was happening, but um, I stepped away from the business when my second child was 1 year old,
Mhm,
so that I could be home more. And in that time, I was teaching graduate school and working as a photographer. And when I came back into the business, it was as a lifestyle model, and I started
yes.
also acting in film and television. And you know, my only experiences really had been in the theater, so I had to make that transition. And I had felt that there's a distinction between um, film acting and theater acting and modeling, and in the years that I was entering into the business as a model and a film actor, I really kind of brought that for myself. I made sense of it as an actor, also as a person who had taught actors,
Mhm,
um, both on camera and for live performance and improvisation. So I started to understand the distinction and the similarity, and began with a kind of philosophy of what the difference is. Um, my first thought. Do you want me to go on?
yes, yes,
About
yes,
the
of
storm.
course.
My first thought as I started was, well, in the theater, you know, following my training, which was, you
Mhm,
know, 19th century model Stanislavski,
mhm,
and the people in the United States like Stella Adler, and
yeah,
so, you know, you become the character. You know, becoming the character is a big deal. Um, one day I was in the class that one of my friends was running. His name is Austin Pendleton. He's a great actor. And there was an actress up there, and she was doing A Streetcar Named Desire, and she was trying to do Blanche, and she was having a very difficult time. And she said, "This character is such a mountain to climb," you know.
mm,
And I was sitting there thinking, you know, when you have to become the character, then the character is something separate from you.
mhm,
And what I have been teaching my students as an improviser is that rather than thinking of becoming the character is something outside of yourself that you have to make.
mhm,
Why not approach character with the idea that all characters already reside within you, that you as a person are capable of anything, like the most beautiful things, and also the most dangerous and hateful things
mhm,
that
mhm.
you personally,
Of course, of course.
just like there were, you know, some very good people in countries during wars have done some very terrible things. You know, good people can do terrible things, and
of course.
and terrible people can do good things. So why not start
Well,
by
it's
saying,
about the circumstances, right? The
yeah, yeah, but we're all so complex. And so if
Mhm,
you accept that all characters are within you, then all you have to do is learn how to express them.
mhm,
And you are the character. You don't have to reach for it. And then when I started acting in film and modeling, especially when I started
mhm,
modeling, I was like, how do I model? And what I learned, which is related in the philosophy I came up with, is that acting, whether you're in theater or in film, is the energy of wanting and seeking. So every character in every play or every movie wants something that they're trying to attain.
mhm,
And the story is in how they go about doing that and whether they get it or not. In modeling, you have the thing that you sought. It's the energy of having and holding that energy. And you
mhm,
can't hold it for long. It's like but um, that's the basis, it turns out, of advertising. You know, um,
of course.
advertising shows people who have attained this thing. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
we recognize that energy and we desire it. You know what I mean? And
Yes, yes,
so
yes,
what they hope is that
yes.
we think if we buy that car, you know what I mean, we'll be
We'll be happy, yeah.
as
Yes,
happy or beautiful as that
yes,
person.
yes, yes.
So now I do think that you can bring that they're so related. You can actually, with film acting, you can make use of holding the energy as well as,
Mhm.
wanting something. Um, so anyway,
Yes.
that's what I
Dan,
think.
in one of your posts on Instagram, you wrote that as a theater actor, you were happiest pretending to be someone else, and that you didn't like the way you looked and sounded.
That's true.
Sounded. Can you take us back to that moment in your life? Like, what was
I
really
think,
going on inside of you?
yeah, I think it was related to all the moving around I did. Uh,
Mhm.
we moved so much that, and I went to international schools where all the other kids are moving around too. And it was my experience that a lot of the American kids were the least happy.
Mhm.
um, these were the days before schools were as sensitive to bullying, you know what I mean, and to
Yes, yes.
violence between students back in those days. And, so I was the recipient of being the new kid, much of the time, of unwanted attention. So
Of course.
I wasn't always, I think over time, it affected my view of myself, I think, to some extent. And I found a refuge in the theater because in the theater you're somebody else. And that person, um, I don't know,
It's like
doesn't
hiding
listen.
behind a mask. Yeah. Hiding.
Yeah. And I actually, as in my actor training, I especially liked mask work. We worked with the classic Italian masks and larval masks, and I really love that kind of work because it was a whole different,
Yeah.
you you become this mask. You know what I mean? So I was a character actor, even though I didn't look like one. I spent the first part of my career as a professional actor doing comedic characters in the classics. So that's how I felt then. I don't feel that way now, but that's how I felt then. Now I enjoy
Yes.
playing people that are very close to me, you know, as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, interesting how we change.
Yeah. So ego often plays a role in performance, like our ego. How
Yeah,
do you keep your ego in check?
that's a good question.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
Wondering as an actor, how to manage all the competition and how to stay true to who you are.
Okay. Well, the truth is that everybody, each person is a unique expression of the universe.
Mhm.
We all have challenges, and some of us have challenges that are greater than others. But nobody can do you as well as you can. And
Yeah,
you know,
that's true. Mm.
it if there was an ideal woman, let's say,
Mhm.
let's assume that there's such a thing as an ideal.
Well, there are beauty standards, right?
There are, but
There are.
let's say that there's an ideal, which
Mhm.
means only one.
Yes.
In that case, if we were to achieve the ideal, every woman would look the same. Every man would look the same. Every wave that rolled onto the beach would be identical to the one before it. The sand would never change shapes. The mountains would always stay the same. Trees would look identical. It would be a nightmarish world of where there was no individuality. And the truth is that, look at Humphrey Bogart. I
Ye
mean, bad teeth, balding,
yes.
weirdo. You know,
Yeah,
there's Humphrey Bogart didn't get to be Humphrey Bogart by pretending to be Cary Grant or whoever else was, around at the time.
true.
Uh,
Yes. Yes,
and
yes.
Cary Grant, wasn't pretending to be anybody else either. So, you know what? This is related to something that happened to me
Mhm,
when I was a young acting student. I was in a shop, a card shop, and I
mhm.
was going through the cards looking for a card, and I found a card of this like old movie still. And I looked at the man's face and I was like, oh, he doesn't look like he's like 100 years ago. He looks like right now. He's
Mhm,
like,
mhm.
and then I looked at the woman with him in the picture and she looked like she was from 100 years ago. And I said, who is this man? You know what I mean? He's happening right now. He's not happening 100 years ago. It was Rudolph Valentino. And if you look at pictures of Rudolph Valentino, you see that he's not he's not so much conforming
Mm,
to an idea of what he is supposed to be. He was, even though he's wearing a costume of a sheik,
yes.
there are moments when you look and you say, I recognize this person, I recognize him.
Mm.
So there's a lesson there, I think, for all of us. You know, we have to be gentle with ourselves and
And with
not
all
beat
the
ourselves,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, yes. Dan, what does success mean to you
Mm.
compared to when you were first starting out?
I think if you're, I think if you feel fulfilled, that's success.
Mm,
Honestly,
mm.
there's if you have, there is no excuse for not being happy if you have your health. And even if you don't have your health, it's possible to be happy. But if you're unhappy and you have your health, and okay, so maybe let's say if you have children, if your children are unhealthy or unhappy, I do have kids.
Me too. I have it,
You do?
yes, yes.
Well, you know how it is. It's like if your
Yeah,
child is unhappy, it affects you, your
of
heart,
course,
because,
of
we love
course.
them. But it's like Andrei Tarkovsky said. He was constantly badgered by the Western journalists who were trying to provoke him to say that he hates communism, and this is a man living under communism,
Yes.
and who knows what he thinks about it, but that's his society. And, he also may have been assassinated by, for all we know, by
Mm.
the communists. He was in no position to talk against his government, but he said one thing to one journalist who said, what do you, how do you feel not being free, to Tarkovsky? And Tarkovsky said, I am free. He said, to be free, all you have to do is say you're free.
It's a
Like,
mindset, right?
it's what?
It's a mindset.
Yes, he was free. He may have been living in a culture that was oppressive
Mm.
uh, of freedoms. Um, and I'm not going to get political because I did not live in that time, nor do I live in this time in that country.
Yes,
I live
yes.
in the United States. So it was a mindset,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
so I think he was a very successful person. And he would have been successful even if his movies hadn't shown in the theater with that mindset.
Mhm.
Um,
Then if cameras and applause didn't exist, would you still act?
if
And
cameras and
right,
applause,
yeah. If there was no audience, like, would you have the need to, like, to act? as a way of expressing yourself, your emotions?
Yeah, sure. I think I think I think what I imagine of the beginnings of theater, I imagine that theater and religion happened in the same moment. Um, and I think when they happened, there was no distinction between the audience and the person performing. So the way I imagine it happening is perhaps around a fire, with a
Mm.
tribe of people who um, needed the hunting to go well in order to survive.
Mhm, mhm,
So some people get up around the fire and dance, pretending to be animals. Others pretend to be hunters, and everybody in the circle is for this thing. There's no separation. And if I'm too tired to dance, then somebody else will get up and do it.
mhm. Yeah.
So being in the theater is no different than telling your children bedtime stories, that you're making up. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes,
Or
yes.
it's no different than, sitting by a fireplace with a loved one and having a deep conversation. It's like it's no different.
Mm.
There
What is the most vulnerable moment you've ever had on stage or in front of a camera? Uh,
my most vulnerable moment. Okay. So I auditioned for this play that I didn't want to get called The
you
Blue Room.
know,
I didn't want to get it. It was called The Blue Room. I was about 40 years old, and uh, in The Blue Room, it's a two-person play, a sequence of scenes between lovers, and there's a
mhm.
lot of nudity. And
Oh, yes.
I was like, no way do I want to do this play. No way. But I thought I'd better go to the audition because my agent will be upset with me. So I think, okay, well, I'll go to the audition. I'll do a good job, but I won't
And
be right. I won't be
the
right for
get the part, huh?
it. Yeah,
And then
I won't get it. But I go to the audition, I do the part, and I leave thinking, hey, that went great. I did a great job, but I wasn't right for it. And there were all these really good-looking, muscular actors, waiting to go in. They're going to cast somebody else. I don't have to worry about this. But then I got a call back,
yes.
and I thought, now what do I do? I have to go to the callback, or else the casting director or my agent will be upset. So again, I think, okay, no worries. I will be a great actor. They'll love me, but they'll say, you know what? We'll call Dan in for another job. I go in. There are all these beautiful men, with muscles in tank tops, and I'm wearing a shirt, like, and I do the audition, and of course I get the part.
Okay.
So I spent the next month working out. I mean, like, I was on the acting side. I was working out. The poor actress that was with me, she's a great actress. Her name's Amy Landecker. We worked out together. We were so nervous. We decided to get naked with each other in private before we we did
Yes,
it.
yes, of course.
So we took our
Yeah.
clothes off, and that was okay. You know what I mean? But but here's what happened. We're doing the show, and I'm completely naked, pretending to, be intimate
Yes.
with Amy. And at one point, I'm standing there, you know what I mean, and I think, you know what? Nobody's listening to a thing I'm saying. they're, they're they're looking at me. You know what I mean? Like, they don't hear a thing I'm saying. I'm the most free person in this room. Like, it's
That
just-
is amazing.
so it turned out to be the scariest, but also the most liberating thing, I guess, I've done on stage.
Amazing experience. So, you've trained with some of the best acting coaches. What lesson stuck with you, not just as an actor, but as a person?
Mm. Okay, so um, two things. The first one, I was working on Shakespeare with
Mhm,
Nora Dunphy, who was a great coach, text coach. And I was like the youngest person in my class at NYU in the graduate acting school. I was actually an undergraduate student. They let me in when I was too young.
uh-huh.
Um, and I was frustrated because uh, I just wasn't very good at it at that point. And she took me aside and she said, Dan, it doesn't take any talent to be frustrated. I thought, what a lesson. She's so right. It's
Yes.
like, so I was also studying martial arts at the same time. And my teacher had said, no questions, no excuses. You know what I mean? So I was like, okay, I can't ask any questions. I can't say, sorry, I didn't get that right. I have
Yeah.
to, I just have to take responsibility. What I do is what I do. I do my
Mhm.
best, and we don't talk about it. And so
Yeah.
I took that approach with the acting. The next
Yeah.
thing was the man who taught me, Paul Walker, taught me theater games and improvisation.
Mm.
And I wound up becoming his assistant, and I took over his class. So I became the theater games teacher at the graduate acting school at NYU, and I was there for 10 years in all. And we worked in a white room. We didn't have any props. It was, and we did some amazing things. And one day when I was actually assisting him, he was teaching a class. Michael C. Hall, who you might know from Dexter, the guy that plays Dexter,
Yes,
that's
yes,
Michael
yes.
C. Hall.
Uh-huh.
He was a student. He was actually in the first film I ever directed, but Michael was doing an exercise, and so was the whole class. And Paula went around. He said, "Okay, what did you think of that?" And Michael said, "We made something out of nothing." And I
Yeah.
thought, now there's a lesson right there. You know,
Yes. Yes.
you don't need anything.
Anything, anything.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
So those two things, I think.
So when you help entrepreneurs present on camera, y you guide them to be real, right? Like, eh,
Yeah. So
do you ever struggle to apply that same, advice to yourself?
to be real,
Yes.
sometimes, I mean, uh, not much anymore.
Mm.
Like uh, it gets easier the longer you do it. To just let go.
Yes.
And it's it can sometimes be hard. It's always hardest to let go when you don't have any time. So like, let's say that you're sent 6 pages of text, and you've got to do it tomorrow, on a self-tape. And it's like, not only that, but the character is like the devil, you know what I mean? And you're like, what? Like,
I can barely remember my words, right? And then
yeah, and I have to
yes,
do
yes.
this character that is so
Yeah, yeah.
intense. So there's a temptation there to push, you know what I mean, for the character.
Yeah.
As soon as you do that, or my daughter is an actress, Ivy, and she,
Uh-huh.
oh, they need me to cry, you know what I mean, to actually cry. I don't do that, and I said, I can teach you, um, but that, like, you have to have a balance, at least initially, as you're getting used to things, to, okay, well, how much do I reach for, and how much do I let be? Like,
Mm.
so, with entrepreneurs, I found it very easy when I was, so you're talking about that I helped entrepreneurs with their on camera.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
So I did that for a number of years, and I found it to be very easy. There's a great similarity between entrepreneurs and actors.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
sure there is.
there is
'Cause
they both are adventurers. Um, they're both at times fearless. The only real distinction is that, you can put on a play
mm.
and not pay the actors except by feeding them coffee and bread. You can
Yeah,
get together, you and I could get together, and we could say, "Hey,
yes.
let's explore Chekhov for 3
Yeah,
months."
yeah, yes, yes, yes.
You'd be like, "Oh, great." You know what I mean? We can use my place. But if you're an entrepreneur, it's like, "Okay, well, how does this add up to a profit?"
Of course.
So that's what
Oh,
I learned from them.
yeah. Do you believe that art can heal the parts of us that feel unseen or unworthy?
100%. Yeah.
And so, how has it healed you?
Well, um, with the idea that there are no mistakes in art, which is, it's an approach to art. Um, there again, that wasn't my idea initially. My teacher, Paul Walker, his father had been an animator for Disney. He
Mhm.
had he had been one of the people that drew the round objects. So in Disney, you either drew straight objects or round objects.
Around, uh-huh.
So he worked on Snow White, the classic old time, and he drew teardrops, raindrops, the dwarfs, they're kind of round, and other people drew trees, and his father, when Paul was trying to learn how to draw and drawing, his stick figures and getting upset, his father said to him, "There are no mistakes in drawing. Whatever
Mhm.
you draw, that's just the way it is." So that's really helped me when Paul related that. And I thought, okay, there are no mistakes. Everything happens the way it should. Now, my caveat to that is it works best when you bring all of yourself to it.
Mhm.
So, and you bring a childlike kind of what we can call a childlike kind of
Yes.
approach to things. We don't
Mm.
we don't hopefully look at a child's drawing and say, "Oh, that's terrible." You know what I mean? You can't do it that way.
No,
Now,
no.
sometimes the worst thing you can do is go to art school. Um,
Yeah, because you learn all the techniques and,
yeah,
uh,
they
you
teach you
look for
the right way
freedom.
to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
But if you look at the artists that we love, like Van Gogh, and Andrew Goldsworthy, these were people that did their own thing. So and they struggled too. You should interview Andrew Goldsworthy, the landscape artist. He'll have a
Uh-huh.
lot to say about this, about the feelings that come up in relationship to doing art that maybe nobody else will even understand or respect. So
Yes.
I think if we take that approach to with ourselves, give ourselves that permission, um, it helps us.
Understand that there's no mistakes, right?
There really aren't. I mean, when you think about it,
Yeah, yeah, of
Every-
course,
it's
of
the
course.
imperfections that you know. It's the imperfections. There we are with the ideal again. In the ideal, there are no imperfections, but it's the imperfections in you that make space for me. And my imperfections are little places that you can hold on to. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I wouldn't want to do away with those imperfections, and uh, I don't think we should lean into them too much. I do try to live my best life. I'm
Of
trying to live
course.
all the way, you know. So
Then
anyway,
how about rejection? Like, rejection is almost a daily reality for actors. How
yeah,
do you process no now compared to when you first started? And do we ever get used to the rejections?
yeah, it's interesting. It's not so different than being in love and being rejected.
Mm,
You have an attachment.
yes.
And the truth is that if you look, that's part of the bargain. When the Buddhists, talk about letting go of attachment. But the truth is, and I have no argument I'm practically Buddhist myself. I have no argument with the Buddhists, but I'll say this, that when you have a child or a grown up who cannot attach, they have what's called attachment disorder.
Mhm.
It creates all kinds of problems. It's in our nature, in human nature, to form attachments. That's what helps us have communities and
Mhm.
culture. We enjoy attachment. The deeper you attach, the more you open yourself to sadness. That's the bargain. If you have a child, if you fall in love with somebody and you adore them, eventually the relationship is going to end in one way or the other.
Yes.
And when it does, there'll
Yes.
be sadness. So
Mhm.
with it's a little different with a performance. because I always think, okay, well, like lots of times you'll get close to something, like people
Really
will be
close.
saying, yeah, they'll be saying it's yours, you know what I mean? Or
Yes.
are you
Yeah.
available? We really want you. And then it turns out they go with somebody else. And what I always think in those times is, uh, okay, well, there's some reason in the universe that it's important for it to happen that way. And
Mm.
other things, are happening for me. So on we go, you know?
Yes, yes, exactly.
It's
And
not
what
going to make
is
a,
the worst, like the hardest rejection you've ever faced in the industry?
oh, in the industry.
Yes.
Okay.
But
Okay.
yes, in the industry.
Um,
Tell me your personal life as well if you want.
no, let's not go there. Let's not. Another time we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
The biggest rejection. There have been several. I'll just come up with one. How about?
Hardest, the one that really stands out.
Well, the hardest. Okay. I was up for a TV show in Bogota, in Colombia.
Mhm,
I get very close, and the character was my character. I mean, there was so much I could have brought to that character, and they went another way. Uh, and so I don't know who they found, you know what I mean, or for what reason, but that's just the way it went. But I spent a couple of days like being like, because I work on visualization.
me too. Yes, yes.
And I was visualizing this. I was aware a little bit that I was forcing it, you know what I mean? But
Mhm,
I saw like things that I felt okay, and I was happy. Um, but when I didn't get it, it took me, I took a little moment to philosophize, and I thought, not everything happens for a reason. Like
do
I
you
like,
believe that? Yeah.
well, I have said in my life, everything happens for a reason. Everything.
Mhm,
I don't think that's necessarily true. I think things happen. I mean, a reason implies predestiny. And
mhm,
I can't say that I believe in that vision of the universe that the future already exists. I find it very intriguing that the future and past exist and that we're kind of in a block time,
mhm, mhm.
but I can't say it exists. I don't know.
So, do you think that it kind of works, like, when you're able to visualize
Mhm.
what you want and then attract it
I do.
in a way?
No, it doesn't work with people. Like, like that much I think I've learned. Everybody has their own lives. So like if there's somebody that you're in love with and that person doesn't know, there's no real point visualizing yourselves together, you know what I mean? Because they have
Yes, yes.
what I mean? Like, but when it comes to other things, I've found it works really well. Yeah, I've visualized things happening and they have, including jobs. And sometimes it isn't really like me, doesn't feel like it's me making it happen. It just feels like while I'm visualizing that there's this gravitational thing that I feel that, like it's kind of coming to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then it has. This is actually connected, though, to another thing. So, I mean, do you want to talk about visualization? Like
Yeah, why not? Let's talk about it.
I've never taken a class in visualization. I've never studied it, but I was intrigued by it because I know that the Soviet athletes did it a long time ago. And I thought, okay, well, how could this work? If we take away the mystical part of it, how does it work practically?
Mhm,
And so what I think figured out was that, okay, well, the experiences that we have change who we are. Like, I'm a happy person because I had this wonderful childhood, right? Uh,
mhm.
so being a happy person changes the things that come to you for sure. Like, so if you visualize, and while you're visualizing, you're having this enjoyment of this outcome that doesn't exist, in subtle ways, that's changing who you are. And when you change, you are more open to the abundance that will come to a person who is like that. So
Hmm.
here's how I began to learn it. I used to be the kind of an actor who would call my agent after an audition and say, "Oh, you know, uh, I don't think I got it. You know, I mean,
Yes.
I'm not so sure. You know, but I did my best. You know, like,
Yes.
but I don't
Yes.
think I got it." And they didn't like me. You know, I was always insecure.
Hmm.
And then when I came back into acting, I said, "I'm never doing that again." I said, "You know what? They're not going to be any more disappointed if I tell them I got the part." And I said, from now on, when I talk to my agent, I'm going to do the opposite. So I had this audition for um, this project. I talked to my agent and I said, they're going to give me the part. I did amazingly well.
And that was true. Like you felt
She
like
was
you.
excited. She was like, all right. She wasn't trying to make me feel good for doing a terrible job. She was like, hey. And then she spent the rest of her day, if she ever thought about me, thinking, Dan's on top of it. He feels good. He's
Yeah.
excited, right? So that changes her perspective of me. It changes my day because I'm like, I'm going to own it. I did a great job. Another time she called me and she said, Law and Order, they lost their actor. You know, they might be calling. And I said, Melissa, they're going to call. That's my job. And they
Eh,
called.
it's like,
And they did. So it was just such a fun, you know, it was a fun direction to move in because it was like, who cares? She's not going to be disappointed. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you change your perspective, or the way you, um, I don't know, the way you see things, the way you interpret the information. Like instead of thinking negatively, you're more towards the positive side.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. It's like I, it's like I mean, you may have had this experience too as a parent. Like, if you have a cranky, you know,
oh
kid,
yeah,
you know,
yes,
I've
yes.
said to my kids, you know, my kids are great. And when they have a wonderful outlook on life, but like everybody else, they've had their bad days. And I've said to them, you know, whether you have a good day today or a bad day is really a choice. You know, you can decide to have a good day or you can decide to have a bad day. You
Hmm.
can make the choice no matter where you're starting from. Like,
Yes.
like the worst thing you can say to yourself is, oh, it's a terrible year. You know, no, it's like you had a moment that wasn't so great. You know?
Why do you think that we are most old people being so hard on ourselves? Why do we chase perfection so much? Like, is it because we want to be accepted? Because we feel the need to be seen by others? We feel that we're not enough?
I think, I think the initial problem is that we hear voices that are not our own
Mm,
that say those things. So, and again, this is not my idea. This is something I read that we internalize the voices we hear as children. You know, so one of the remarkable things about people is that typically good people, when they're teaching children, like you open a book with a child and they're learning to read, and
mhm.
the kid says, the dog ran, and you go, hey, that's great. You read that. You're really good at reading. Right. And
Yes.
you turn the page. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What do you think's happening here? Oh, look. Right. And, and you have this relationship with the child where everything's magical, everything's wonderful. And they're hearing, you're great at that. You're great at math. You can really run fast.
Mhm.
Now, if you've ever been in a hard place in your life and you find yourself saying, you can do it, you can do it, that is a voice that you internalized. Maybe your friend said it to you, maybe your coach said it to you, maybe your parents said it to you, or your brother or
Yeah.
sister. You can do it. And now you're saying it to yourself, giving yourself courage to go on. Well, if you heard voices that said you're ugly and you internalize them and you're not careful, you'll be hearing yourself in your mind saying, why aren't you pretty enough?
Mm.
Why do you have to be so stupid? You always make mistakes. You see, it's like,
Yes. Yes.
so I think in both cases, it's really good to, if you hear that voice, you identify it. You say, that voice is here that says you're not beautiful. Or to say, hey, where did that voice come from telling me that I can do it? Somebody believed in me, you know what I mean? And now I believe in me. I think it's really good to take a moment, you know what I mean, to identify these things as they happen to us. Anytime you speak of yourself in the third person, anytime.
Yeah. Of course. Of course. So, if you could give one piece of of heartfelt advice to your younger self, standing in line for auditions, what would it be? To not worry so much, maybe to
Yeah.
have faith in what you do.
I'd say, you know, do your very best and be gentle with yourself. And there's no need to apologize for your work. You know, that life is long. You know, you have to take care of yourself to really make it to have the full
Yes.
to have the full experience. You know,
Uh-huh.
not to deny yourself that.
Yeah.
And I think I would also say, you know, uh, be careful to surround yourself with people who are gentle and good with you. You know, I think that's very helpful.
Mhm. Yeah. So, what was the moment that you felt most proud
Proud.
in your career? Yeah.
I did a one man show at the Long Wharf Theater. Uh, I played the good thief, only one character, and you talk nonstop. You know, you just like talk, 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 talk.
Yes.
Whole show. No intermission, and with an Irish accent. You know, which had to be authentic.
Oh,
So uh, they said, "Dan, do you want us to give you an earbud?" You know what I mean, just in
yes.
case.
Just in case. Yeah.
And I said, "No," you know, no. And in the first performance, which was an invited dress rehearsal, um, going through, you know what I mean, this entire story
Uh-huh.
and the point, and I forgot my lines. And this is what happened in that moment, you know, rather than racing, you know what I mean, going through
Yes.
the Rolodex
Yeah.
pages.
Through the whole script. Yeah.
I didn't do
But
any of that.
it's in your mind. Yeah.
I just sat there and I inhaled and I exhaled, and then the next line came. Like I didn't force it, you know. So uh, the piece was very reflective, you know what I mean, and nobody knew. But it was a moment when this kind of that's one of the best moments I've had on stage. Here's another one. I was at the Williamstown Theater Festival. This is as a young actor with Maria Tucci in the lead. A play called The Rose Tattoo.
Mhm.
James Naughton was in it, and uh, so there's a storm that night, like outside the theater, like a lightning coming in.
Uh-huh.
And for some reason, I'm getting very nervous before I walk on to do my part. And I start thinking, well, what could go wrong? You know what I mean? Maybe I'll trip over that piece of
Uh-huh.
stage. Okay, so be careful not to trip there. Maybe the door won't open. You know, okay, what do I do if the door doesn't open? Okay, just like, okay, I'll walk around, you know, and then I start I'm waiting, and I'm thinking, okay, what's going to happen? Maybe a light will fall down. Maybe, maybe I'll trip and, break my elbow. I can't stop thinking of the possibilities. And then suddenly the cue light goes off and I have to walk on. So I, I go walking on expecting something to happen. I get on stage and there's thunder from the storm.
Mhm.
And then there's a big crack of lightning and the entire theater goes dark except for this tiny battery operated light that was in an icon of Mary, the mother of Christ.
Uh-huh.
Maria Tucci, it was a scene between Maria Tucci and I. And I could tell she put her head back because of how it sounded, like her throat.
Yes.
And she said, an act of God. Like she, said that as herself.
Yes.
And there was a little laughter in the audience. And then it went perfectly quiet and we waited. And in that moment, the audience, everybody was together, breathing. It was so still. And then the lights came on and we acted. And it was like nothing had ever happened. And I thought, this is magical. I knew something was going to happen. I didn't know what it was. And what happened was this transcendent moment between
Mm.
the audience and all of us. We were in the same space. You know what I mean?
You could feel the
So,
energy, right?
yes, it was, you know,
Yes. Overwhelming.
that might have been the best. I think that was the best moment.
Yeah. That must have been the best. So you made all the you thought of all the scenarios that could happen, but
Yeah.
that was something else.
Yeah. Something else.
So you've worn many hats: actor, father, teacher, model. Which of those roles brought you closest to peace with yourself, and where you felt most happy or
Hmm.
in alignment?
Um, well, I think the most important thing I've done is the one of the greatest responsibility is to be a father because um and that's just because I've created these humans uh
Mhm.
that are going to go off and have an impact on the world and potentially multiply. So
Yes.
it's like that's like what have I done? What have I done? So I have to do my best, to be a great father, and I do my best. So there's that. The maybe the most well, it's hard to pick, but as a photographer, I learned a lot. I spent a lot of time alone. I wound up moving from performance photography to portrait, and then I wound up taking pictures, fine art pictures of nature and of objects. And I learned so much doing that about what art is, which I
Mm,
wasn't sure. Um, the nature of our time, you know, and in relationship to a photograph,
mhm,
that time to expose, and then the time you spend looking at the photograph, the the um, the perspective of it. Like
mhm.
anytime you see a picture, you're you're actually seeing through that person's eyes.
Yes. Yes.
Anytime you take a picture, um, you've chosen to do that. Even if it's a picture of yourself, you've chosen to do that. And as much as we want to dismiss the pictures that we don't like, or let's say the video we don't like of
Mhm.
ourselves, right? Or let's say you,
Yes.
you take a picture of a plant or your cat and you want to send it to your friend and you say, no, I can't do that. It's a dumb picture. I'll take another one, right? But it's important not to dispose of the ones that you don't like because you chose to do them. And so as a photographer, I learned to save all of my negatives. This is back in the days of film. never throw them away. Um, that taught me a lot. You know what I mean? Like I had to accept the parts of my photography of myself that I didn't, for some reason, like.
Uh,
So that was a good learning experience.
yes. Then what do you think people misunderstand most about actors when it comes to ego, vulnerability?
I think a lot of people that aren't in the business have an impression that actors are a particular kind of person. That, like as a person, like if I'm rather shy, for
Uh,
like this is easy for me because it's just us. Like if we were at
yes.
a party, I have danced on tables, but I'm more likely to be the person in a corner having a conversation with one other person.
Uh,
I'm not like, you know, uh, so I think a lot of people think that actors are somehow larger than life. You know what I mean?
yes, yes.
Always pretending to have feelings. You know what I mean? And it is a very peculiar art form, because it's so collaborative. But there's so many different personalities in, of actors. So
Yeah.
I think that's something that sometimes people aren't as aware of as they might.
Yeah. So in the spirit of ego is here, when all is said and done, where do you feel your ego has left its deepest mark? In what area uh, of your life as an artist? Always.
As an artist. I think what I'm closest to now is the idea that nothing lasts, that it can be fun to think about the impact our work will have, you know, that I'll do this great work, and everyone will love it. I'll be famous. It'll be, it'll be there in the record. You know what I mean? Like a great movie, like an Orson
Yes.
Welles movie, or
Yeah.
But the truth is that in 100,000, 200,000 years, they project that humanity will cease to exist in about 300,000 years. I think it might be less. And when that time comes, there'll be nobody to remember or to look at. Nobody will remember. I mean, if we look at it this way, like if 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 you see pictures of your mom
Uh-huh.
and dad, your aunts and uncles, you can feel connected to them, even though they might look like they're from the 70s. You know what I
Of
mean?
course. Of course. Yes.
You look at pictures of your grandparents, you can feel connected to them, even if
Uh-huh.
young people, but it looks older. But then if you look at your great grandparents, there's probably there's very little
Right.
identification there.
Uh-huh.
And that's not that much time. So it's of little value. I mean, I like Charlie Chaplin's movies.
Me too. Of course.
There's a lot there, but let's be honest. I mean, it's a little harder sometimes to, connect on a deep level. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so what we have is temporary, it's ephemeral, and it's probably of little value to think of the impact it's going to have down the road. We should do it for now.
Yes. Yeah. So, Dan, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed our conversation. We had so much laughter. Like, I loved your stories.
Thank you. It's been
You're amazing.
really good. I'd love to, somehow we'll continue our conversation.
Of course we will. Of course we will. And to all of you out there, remember, ego was here, you are here, and that's enough.